According to our friends at FAIR, F-A-I-R, the number of U.S. visitor visas granted to the Ebola-stricken countries has been rising sharply at the same time the disease is multiplying at exponential rates, representing a volatile combination that merits visa restrictions. In 2013, the U.S. issued 3,500 visas to Liberians, a country with over half of the 8,914 reported cases, and 13,000 visa totals between Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea. This week, the World Health Organization has released dire news, upping the fatality estimate from 50 to 70%, and estimating there will be 10,000 new cases of Ebola in West Africa by December of this year. So, why all the visas? And why more visas than usual? Jeez. And you liberals out there want these people to run our healthcare system, to design our automobiles, to determine what our kids can eat at school. I mean, these are stupid people. These are ideologues. The New York Post today, a gentleman by the name of Robert Goldberg. He's vice president of the Center for Medicine in the Public Interest and publisher of valueofinnovation.org. He says we have technology to potentially control Ebola and other viral outbreaks today. But the federal bureaucracy refuses to catch up with 21st century science. This is a very, very important column, as you'll see as I go through it, because he's going to explain the problem is the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. You know, we hold these entities, these government entities up high and say, well, whatever they say, the CDC, NIH, FDA, wrong. Well, of course they do some good. You know how much money they get? That's not the point. He says, for example, diagnostic startup Nanobiosm has an iPhone-sized device that can accurately detect Ebola and other infectious diseases in less than an hour. You don't need to take temperatures, which won't work. Two other companies, Synthetic Genomics and Norvitis, you've seen them on TV, have the capacity to create synthetic vaccine viruses for influenza and other infectious diseases in only 4 days. Both firms can also share data about outbreaks instantaneously and make real-time, geographically specific diagnoses and vaccine production possible. So what's the problem? These companies could start producing Ebola vaccine treatments tomorrow, except that the Food and Drug Administration's insistence on randomized studies and endless demands for more data means firms have to spend millions and millions on paperwork instead of producing medicines. And for every small company drained by such tactics, many others conclude it's not even worth trying. This is a crucial point. Government, even when it comes to diseases, when it comes to illnesses, when it comes to epidemics, when it comes to finding medicines and technologies and processes to fight them. Government is a tortoise. It's a tortoise. And by the time the tortoise finishes the finish line, it's often wrong. It's at the starting line. These advances aren't available because the FDA is using 19th century science to decide which medical technologies should be used in the 21st century. 2 years after 9/11, Congress created Project BioShield to speed up the commercialization of vaccines, drugs, and diagnostics. A key part of the plan, get the FDA to evaluate innovations quickly by using the same scientific advances that were used to discover them. While the FDA balked, pandemic vaccines and drugs don't move through the FDA approval process faster. Instead, drug and device development times actually increased more than 70% over the past decade because the FDA keeps demanding more studies, more data, while it's using outdated techniques. And no, the FDA is not using the best science to ensure our safety. Time and again, it has waived regulations when politically expedient. Back in 1984, at the start of the AIDS epidemic, the FDA claimed that reviewing HIV treatments would take at least 6 to 8 years. Only after loud, large, sustained demonstrations did it state that the new AIDS drugs could be okayed in 2 years or less, and that most people who wanted to try them could. and millions of lives were saved as a result. In 2008, it took synthetic genomics scientists a month to sequence the genes of every strain of meningitis virus and engineer a vaccine that protects against them all. In Europe, Canada, Australia, the vaccine was approved for use in children, which is the group most likely to get meningitis and die from it, in 2010. But the FDA demanded another study in the United States. And only after meningitis hit Princeton University and UC Santa Cruz this year, 2014, did the agency allow the vaccine to be imported, and give to students on both campuses. And the FDA agency still hasn't approved its general use. Ebola is the same story. Take ZMapp, a combination of antibodies designed to block the virus from replicating. Citing safety concerns, the FDA ordered the drug's maker, MAP Biopharmaceutical, to stop testing this July, just days before the Ebola outbreak. Now, of course, the FDA is letting people use it. The same goes for antiviral drug TMK Ebola, made by Timkemera Pharmaceuticals. The FDA suspended research this January because of safety concerns. It changed course only after Ebola killed thousands. Now, part of the problem, FDA scientists receive no reward for approving breakthroughs, but suffer public anger if but one person dies because a drug is misused. The price we pay for this culture of caution rises every single day. Africa will have to spend billions of dollars to treat those infected, rebuild health systems, and bury the dead. Here at home, public officials find themselves a step behind Ebola. And as they lose our confidence in their ability to respond to biological threats, they blame the Ebola crisis on what else? Budget cuts. Asked why there's no Ebola vaccine, NIH Director Francis Collins claimed, we'd have one if not for NIH budget cuts. Nonsense. NIH funding for infectious diseases has doubled since 2001. But in 13 years, it developed 3 ineffective vaccines. Nobel laureate microbiologist Joshua Lederberg noted, the single biggest threat to man's continued dominance on the planet is a virus. While the second biggest threat, a federal culture that rewards the delay of medical progress. Ultimately, Congress must change the FDA's mission and bureaucratic culture. Reviewers shouldn't be allowed to use science to keep new technologies from doctors and patients. We must force the FDA to focus on accelerating innovation and stop protecting us to death. By Robert Goldberg. And he's right. And he's right, and this underscores it. And anybody out there who personally or as a family member who has suffered from some egregious disease or illness or defect or whatever it is, and knows that a particular drug, especially drugs, but technology or what have you, is stuck at the FDA. You're desperate to get your hands on it, and you can't. They won't even allow you to sign waivers. Okay, we'll waive whatever lawsuit, we'll waive everything. We need it. No. People have died waiting for FDA approvals. Why? And the FDA is worse in many respects than its sister and brother agencies in Europe. Well, Mark, we want to be safe. Of course we want to be safe. But we need flexibility, we need efficiencies, unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, that government is incapable of. When they say they need more money, you know what that means? A bigger bureaucracy. To issue more regulations. Can you tell me one agency that gets more money and becomes more efficient? One agency that gets more money and makes better decisions? One agency that gets more money and becomes more competitive in its hiring practices? One agency that gets more money, resulting in less waste, fraud, and abuse? Can you tell me one agency, one department? No, you can't. So before you surrender all your liberty, all your common sense to big government and the politicians who love it, think about these things. One of the reasons why drugs are so expensive in this country, legal drugs that have legitimate uses and purposes, is because in some cases it takes 15 or 20 years to get their approval. And billions of dollars. 20 years from the time it's in the lab to the time it gets approved. Almost like building a nuclear power plant. Why does my drug cost so much? That's why. The R&D is enormous. And think about this as well. The genius of finding drugs that can really improve the quality of life or extend somebody's life. It's in many respects hit and miss. So there's a genius there. And that's great. But if it becomes so stifling to get that drug to market, if it becomes so cost prohibitive to get that drug to market, or once you get it to market, the government starts to price control, or they say, no, we need generics. And you can't get your money, your investment back, which is, after all, the way you invent things, through investors who put their money up, through employees, wonderful employees who you pay, pensions, benefits, salaries to. All these things cost money. They're not free, but the government adds enormous costs to the production of drugs, and it prevents some drugs from coming to market altogether, and some drugs from coming to the market in time. And God knows all the wonderful medical devices and drugs and so forth that we might have, but for a bloated bureaucracy. That's too big. No, I'm not saying we should go back to snake oil salesmen, but I am saying those who keep saying, oh, we need the FDA to get bigger so we can get things out faster. You've got it wrong. Works in reverse.